In this part of the video series, we're going to talk about a super important concept, and that is routing. How do we route a packet from one network, one subnet, to another subnet? We're going to begin our discussion by taking a look at IPv4, and we'll begin that discussion by reviewing how binary works, because we're going to do a lot of binary mathematical operations in these series of modules in this part of the video series. And IPv4, we're going to see that it's a 32-bit address, and we're going to see how to take those 32 bits and say some of those bits are going to be used to represent the network, and some of those bits are going to be used to represent the host on the network, and we can play with that a little bit. We can do different types of subnetting, and we'll give you plenty of practice exercises with that. Then our discussion is going to shift to IPv6, a new version of IP, and it has a lot of great features. It is massively more scalable than IPv4, so we'll give you a nice primer on IPv6, and then we'll turn our attention to the router itself. How do we do some basic configuration on the router? How do we connect to the router? How do we set up some basic things like a host name on a router? Then we're going to see how to configure routing on the router. How do we actually train that router to look at a packet and decide how to forward that packet based on a destination IP address? We're then going to wrap up this part of the video series by taking a look at troubleshooting routing issues. We'll go into the router and we'll get information about the interface status, and we'll take a look at how packets are being propagated through the network. Can we get to the next router? Great. Can we get to the router after that and after that? We can trace a route throughout the network and see where things break down. We can check connectivity with a specific device out there on the network. And the interfaces themselves, they have a wealth of information. They have all kinds of error counters that we can look at and interpret to give us some indication as to what's going on. Let's get started. In this module, we want to discuss IPv4. Yes, IPv6 is out. It is growing in popularity, but most of the networks today are still reliant on IPv4, and it's super critical that we understand the operation of IPv4 before we get into all of the binary math involved with IPv4 and subnetting and things like that. We want to take a look at basic binary. We'll take a look at how to convert a binary number into a decimal number and vice versa. We'll take a look at IP addressing. What's the structure of an IPv4 address? How do we assign an IPv4 address to a client machine, as an example? Once we do that, we're going to get into a subnetting discussion. It's going to get a little bit mathematical, but we'll take our time. We'll give you plenty of examples, and we'll see how to do some design work when it comes to IPv4. If we need to allocate for a certain number of subnets on the network, we'll see how to do that. If I need to accommodate a certain number of hosts on the network, we'll see how to do that. And it's really important, and this is super important on your exam as well, to be able to look at a topology and to see an IP address that a host has and ask yourself a question. Does the IP address that is assigned to this host, does that belong to the subnet to which this host is attached? Our eyes can play tricks on us. We can see an IP address that looks perfectly valid, but based on the subnet mask, it's really not. We're going to see exactly how to determine what valid range of IP addresses belong to a subnet, so we can easily see, is this PC's IP address part of that subnet or not? Let's get started though with a review of binary numbering.